Hey everybody, and welcome to the second week of class. Hopefully by this point you've got a feel for how this class is going to run and how it's going to work. Again, each week you're going to have a series of readings that you'll need to do, and you can follow my kind of course reading schedule if you want, that I identify in the reading assignments section within each modules, or of course you can read at your own leisure and at your own pace, whatever works best for you. But hopefully by this point you get a feel for that. So you've got the reading, you've got some videos, and then you've got some questions to look at. I will definitely be working on getting those questions graded and back to you as fast as I can. So just give me some time, because of course there's a lot of you and only one of me, and I'm going to do what I can to get comments back to you and give you a feel for what you can improve upon or what you're doing well, so that you can continue to do that on future answers. So what we got going on this week is we're going to be looking at a period of history that I call unprecedented change. And there was a number of different events that transpired in the early 20th century which revolutionized not just the United States, but the world at large. And so we're going to begin with probably the most climactic event of the 20th century. You might argue that World War II was more climactic, but at the moment at least, the Great War, or what we now call World War I, really took center stage as probably the most climactic event in human history, and it just changed the way people understood humanity, and really led to a kind of a cultural revolution following the war, with a group of artists and authors known as the Lost Generation, trying to make sense exactly of what World War I was. Now, in a large scale, World War I is not an American conflict. It really doesn't involve the United States for majority of the conflict. The war starts in 1914 and it ends effectively in 1918 on Armistice Day, which is 11/11/11. On November 11th, which is the month 11, at the 11th day, at the 11th hour, World War I comes to an end. Now, the United States gets involved with World War I in 1917, and there are a number of reasons for why the U.S. gets involved, and we'll talk about some of those this week. But chief among them really had to do with unrestricted submarine naval warfare against the United States at the hands of the Germans. Germany continued to just harass American merchant vessels, as well as other vessels, including the Lusitania, which was blown up in 1915. And in fact, a lot of people will say that it's because of the Lusitania being blown up that the United States got involved in World War I, and that's not entirely true, because if it had been true, we would have gotten involved in 1915, but we don't get involved until 1917. But they continued to repeatedly harass American ships, and continue to engage in unrestricted submarine warfare. And so after a series of attacks by the Germans, as well as a letter known as the Zimmermann Telegram, which we'll talk about this week, but basically a note that the Germans were sending to Mexico, basically telling them if they were to ally with Germany, invade the United States, then Germany would return land that the United States had taken possession of in 1848 following the Mexican-American War. This gets intercepted. The United States finds out about it, and because of this hostile conflict that's already been going on against the United States, eventually we declare war against Germany. Now, for the majority of the conflict, the United States remains isolated. We maintain a position of neutrality, and this sense of isolationism is going to pervade the United States both before and after the war. But yeah, we get involved in this conflict, and although the United States maintained itself as a separate fighting force, we didn't necessarily join the Allies here. The sheer amount of folks that we threw into this conflict, millions of people, helps to turn the course of the war. Now, one of the main reasons why Woodrow Wilson, who's president, wants to get involved in this conflict is he, one, wants to, as he said, make the world safe for democracy. He believed that autocratic governments had forced people into a conflict that they otherwise would not have wanted. He particularly sees this to be true with Germany, that an autocratic government, a kind of totalitarian government, did not do the will of the people. Rather, this Kaiser Wilhelm decided to do his own desires, his own will, and that was to force the German people into war. The other thing that's going to be really important this week for World War I, of course, is the end of the conflict. And specifically, you're really going to want to focus in on the Treaty of Versailles and the fact that the treaty really does not create a lasting peace. Instead, it really creates a situation which is going to neatly set up World War II because of the consequences against Germany. And we'll talk about those later this week. But basically, Germany is given total responsibility for this war. And we're talking about 10 million people who died. I mean, the destruction wrought by this conflict was monumental, in large measure because of the new technologies of the day. Machine guns, you're talking about poison gases, you're talking about airplanes and bombs and a whole range of new forms of weaponry that had never been used before, like the tank. Really changed the nature of war, and it really killed a lot of folks. And Germany is going to be held responsible for that. They're also going to have to pay reparations for that. And so the Treaty of Versailles really doesn't set up peace. But one of the things that Woodrow Wilson wants to do is he wants to establish what he calls his 14 points. And there are a number of different things that Wilson wants to do within these 14 points, including create something known as the League of Nations. And we'll talk about that this week as well. Ultimately, the United States does not ratify the Treaty of Versailles. We do not join the League of Nations because, as many senators thought, this treaty, this league, will really just bring the United States into further European conflicts. So that's one topic we're looking at this week. The other two, one will be the decade of the 1920s. This is a really significant decade. It's really a time of social and cultural and even political change. It is during this time that women gained the right to vote. And a lot of that has to do with the progressive movement that we talked about last week. But women's suffrage definitely comes into its own during the 1920s. And there is a new movement to develop what is called a new woman, a sexually liberated female who is no longer going to try and live by the constraints of the older generation. And in many ways, what you find during the 1920s is a modern culture, modernism, that is sexual liberation and wanting to adopt new forms of thinking and practices, adopting evolution, for example. You're going to see modernism kind of pit up against more traditionalism and more conservatism. And it's interesting to note because the 1920s is highly remembered as kind of the Roaring 20s. It is a time punctuated by jazz music and flappers and speakeasies where bootlegged gin is being sold because, of course, we've got the Noble Experiment where prohibition is on, right? And so the 1920s is really seen as a decade of decadence, and in many ways it was. And the reason for that is because of World War I. Many people came to conclude that, hey, life is short. We might be dead tomorrow. So let's enjoy life now. You really can't overstress the importance of the sexual liberation movement that began in the 1920s. And much of that was actually facilitated by manufacturing. When we talk about the significance of the internet in the world today, we could talk just as equally about the importance of the vehicle, the automobile, during the 1920s. It gave people a sense of liberation. And as many historians will tell you, those vehicles were used for other reasons besides just transporting people from one place to the next. I mean, in many ways, the automobile and excess spending money really changed the way in which people dated and interacted with one another, so much so that what we do today with respects to dating, that is, the man asks, generally, the traditional one, the man asks, he picks up, he pays, he drops off, right? There might be some kind of expectation for sexual favor. A lot of that is harnessed by the culture developed during the 1920s, okay? But beyond being a decade of decadence in jazz music and flappers, the 1920s is also a decade of increased nativism. And nativism is basically a fear of immigrants. And it's during the 1920s that the United States is going to pass a series of immigration acts, particularly the Immigration Act of 1920, which is going to establish a set of quotas that will limit the number of immigrants that can come into the United States from various countries. And basically, the Immigration Act of 1924 set the quotas to the census of 1890, so that what the United States was really looking to do was to limit what we would call the new immigrant. And the new immigrant was an immigrant that was from Southern and Eastern Europe. They tended to not be Protestant in their religion. They tended to not be English speaking. And what the United States wanted to do with its quotas was to reduce the number of new immigrants coming into the country because there were fewer of them coming in 1890. So if you set the census data to 1890, then you're going to have fewer people from, say, Italy or Russia coming in, and you're going to have more people from the countries where old immigration was coming from, and that would be places like England and Germany and Ireland. Old immigrants tended to be more white-skinned, English-speaking. They tended to be more Anglo in their institutions and thinking. So you definitely see a rise of nativism in the 1920s, evidenced by the Ku Klux Klan. In fact, the KKK comes to its pinnacle of popularity in the 1920s. And the KKK is deeply nativistic. They are no longer isolated to the South, and they are no longer just attacking African Americans. They now are broadening their sphere of influence across the country. You also see a series of events that will demonstrate nativism and the fear of modernism. So we could take a look at the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, which we'll talk about later this week, as well as the Monkey Scopes trial, where basically you saw evolutionary theory pit against Christian fundamentalism, and we really see it. This tension between these two modern movements and the more traditional movement kind of come to head there. So lots to talk about with the 1920s. And then finally, we've got the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was radical at the time. Of course, the United States had never experienced anything quite like it. And in many instances, the cause for the Great Depression was, in fact, the economic explosion during the 1920s. The United States was producing upwards to about 50% of the world's manufactured goods during the 1920s, and the economy was clipping along pretty well. The problem is that we had begun to overproduce, and overproduction means that you no longer need people in order to sell goods. Basic supply and demand. There wasn't enough demand. We had too much supply, and the economy began to dip around 1927, 28, and then of course 29, you're going to have the stock market crash, which is ultimately the thing that facilitates the Great Depression. But the stock market crash is not really the only thing that really caused the Great Depression. You do have this sense of overproduction. You also have people buying stocks on margin. That is, they're not paying the full price for the stock. They're borrowing up to 90% of the stock's value. And so really what you have is a stock market that keeps climbing, and it looks like stocks are doing very, very well. But the reality is there's not a lot of real actual money supporting the stock market. And when around 27, 28, when the real economy began to cool, the stock market sort of disconnected from the real economy, and it continued to go. And that was a real problem. Another cause for the Great Depression, of course, is that there was an unequal distribution of wealth. People were making money hand over fist during the 1920s, but it didn't necessarily mean that your general worker was going to find that money in their pocket. A lot of that money was being reinvested into production and manufacturing and growing various companies. So we'll talk more about the causes, but that's really what you got. During the Great Depression, of course, we got two presidents, Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. One's a Republican. Hoover was a Republican, and Roosevelt is the Democrat. Hoover, of course, was of the opinion that the federal government should not specifically help individuals by cutting them Social Security checks, although Social Security didn't exist then, at least not until Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. And that's precisely where we're going to really focus our efforts this week, is to look at the New Deal, because the New Deal really changed things. It changed not only the political landscape by creating a new voting coalition, but it really changed the way in which we as people understand the role of government in the lives of people on a day-to-day basis. You know, before the Great Depression, it was will the government help you? Now it's how will the government help you? We expect the government to come in and help us whenever there's a problem. And so we really want to focus in on that New Deal, which was basically a set of programs and agencies. It's known as Franklin Roosevelt's alphabet soup, because there were so many different agencies, and they're all given these letters: the TVA, the CCC, the NRA, the SSA, you know, a whole bunch of them. So we're going to be looking at that, guys. And the Great Depression, of course, changes the lives of people across the board. It creates a great deal of poverty. It increases suicide rates, abandonment rates, and of course, on top of that, you've also got the Dust Bowl, which is going to happen. And so there's a whole lot that we're going to be looking at this week. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking here, let you guys get into the rest of the material, but hopefully this helps. So Of course, you've got your assignments for this week, but if you have questions, contact me and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, as always, go in peace, be warm and filled. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper, and may the odds forever be in your favor. Have a blessed week, guys.